For almost 2 decades, the long journey of the petroleum industry bill has now reached its climax as Nigeria's oil and gas sector has been ushered into a new era with the passing of the much-awaited petroleum industry bill by the National Assembly. The passage is expected to usher in reforms and provide the fiscal framework that promotes business and investments into the Nigerian most important resource, oil, gas, and a key focus of the bill is the unbundling and commercialization of the Nigerian Petroleum Corporation (NNPC), as well as scrapping of the Petroleum Equalization Fund and the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency. The bill also provides for 30% of profits accruing from oil and gas operations by the NNPC Limited for the exploration of oil in the frontier basins and allocates 3% profit from oil companies for host communities. Now, the current title of the bill is for an act that seeks to address and provide legal governance, regulatory and fiscal framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of the host community, and for other related matters, with enhanced accountability and transparency while promoting sustainable development in the oil and gas industry. The accelerated passage of the bill that was initiated in 2008 no doubt will stimulate a more robust participation, generate economic activities, as well as reposition the NNPC operations against a practice established out of the 1969 Act. These issues are going to be our focal points on the program tonight. Those that would know will talk about it. I am Omini Oden, your regular host, and set for the pace for conversation tonight. Let's take this background report before we begin, put together by Ignatius Nko.
June 2021 marks the end of an era in Nigeria's top legislative arm of government, the termination of the Petroleum Industry Bill 18 years parliamentary journey. The Petroleum Industry Bill was conceived during the Olusegun Obasanjo administration in 2000 as part of recommendations by the Oil and Gas Sector Reform Implementation Committee headed by Dr. Rilwanu Lukman. Its first legislative courtship with the National Assembly was in the 4th Assembly in 2003 as an executive bill. Like a new bride, the Petroleum Industry Bill received great acceptance by the legislators in view of its potential to reform Nigeria's oil and gas sector, open up the industry, attract investors, and give adequate attention to host communities. But at the time, it turned out into a parliamentary tug-of-war, and its courtship with the 6th Assembly did not go beyond second reading. The 7th Assembly also failed to pass it, while the 8th Assembly broke the bill into 4 versions. That is, the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, Petroleum Hosts and Impacted Community Bill, Petroleum Industry Administration Bill, and the Petroleum Industry Fiscal Bill. That assembly was able to pass only the governance version, which did not receive presidential assent due to some critical observations made by the executive.
Because it had so many what was called impurities then, so many reservations, so much monies were given to different of the agencies under the petroleum, and then Mr. President considered that there will be less money available for the federation account to distribute.
In virtually every point of engagement, we have had so many challenges to do with some political reasons, some issues, even sentiments as regards issues to do with the host communities, issues to do with the cost of oil pricing.
The 9th National Assembly, in consultation with the executive, ensured that the areas of contention were addressed, especially the regulatory authority and the percentage of dividends to host communities, this time as a single bill from the executive, and has been passed by both chambers of the National Assembly.
First time in this, within these 2 years, we had a retreat. We never had it before in the history of this assembly, where the executive and the legislature will spend 2-3 days to have a retreat.
Senate adopted 3% as development fund for host communities, while House of Representatives passed 5%. Both chambers are now expected to reconcile this variation in a conference committee. The enactment of the Petroleum Industry Bill into law is long overdue, having engulfed huge sums of money for retreats and consultations since 2003. It has seen Nigeria incur losses from regulatory uncertainties in the sector, with some individuals and companies taking advantage of the legal loopholes.
I know you must have caused the federal government huge sums of money doing retreat abroad, even in Nigeria. But the good news is that the oil producing communities in Nigeria will have a sigh of relief with this bill.
The passage of this bill into law is expected to be the game changer that will fully unlock the Nigerian oil and gas sector. Ignatius Nkwo, NTA News.
PIB and matters arising, and Ignatius Nkwo's report sets the tone for the takeoff of the program tonight. It promises to be very insightful as our team of guests will be available to address core issues around the bill that is being discussed in the public domain. Well, I'm being joined right now via Zoom by Professor Yinka Omorogbe, Research Professor, Nigerian Institute of Advanced Studies, and President, Nigeria Association of Energy Economics, via Zoom in Abuja. Good to see you on the program tonight.
Very much for inviting me.
Well, this is one of the longest bills that has stayed in the National Assembly. So many stories around it, and now it has been passed. Let's look at the positives. If all the issues around the bill are resolved, where are we heading in terms of the viability of that sector?
Well, without a doubt, I think the first thing to note is that we need the bill. There is no alternative. We have got an outdated petroleum sector right now with obsolete laws and obsolete and outdated legal framework. And as we are now, we simply cannot get to where it is that we want to be. So the first thing is to note that the legal framework is outdated and obsolete. What has been the effect of that? The effect of that has been to scare off investments and to scare off finance. I think a lot of people don't realize that Nigeria is by no means a beautiful bride right now. Investments have been dwindling to Nigeria. The percentage has been very, very little. And of the investments coming into Nigeria, very, very little, a small fraction, in fact, has been coming into the oil and gas industry. In fact, according to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, in 2020, only 0.55% of, that is 0.55%, came into the petroleum industry. The truth is, money doesn't go where there is a great deal of uncertainty and where there is so much that is opaque. So it's well that we have this bill. I have to say from the onset that my position is that there's far more good than bad in the bill, and I think that is what we need to concentrate on.
The second line is that when it was sent to the National Assembly, it came as a robust document, almost looking amorphous, but in the wisdom of the National Assembly, it was broken down to about 4 sections. The petroleum industry bill consists of distinct chapters which include governance and institutions, administration, host communities development, petroleum industry fiscal framework, and the miscellaneous provisions comprising 319 clauses and 8 schedules. Is this about for convenience of governance, or what do you make out of this?
From the onset, you know, I was in the first oil and gas sector implementation committee, and I was one of the first drafters of the first bill that came out but didn't get to the National Assembly during the first
Morogbe's signals just dropped. We'll get back to us as soon as the team of engineers puts it up. In the course of the discussion, we'll have other team members and the panelists who will join us on the program tonight. But let's take this report from Owerri.
The interest generated by the petroleum industry bill is enormous, and this, of course, is understandable as it goes to show how eager Nigerians are to ensure that government gets it right. Having gone through several administrations before being finally passed by the 9th Assembly, they hope that the PIB holds its manifest.
Heartwarming that finally the petroleum industry bill is before the president for his assent, even as there's a lot of controversy over whether he should sign it as it is or not. You know, this country is run basically on the proceeds of petroleum and its byproducts. And it's also the basis for a lot of revenue allocation. And from there goes a whole lot of other things, development and all that. So that's why it has generated a lot of interest amongst Nigerians.
Some respondents who critically examined the bill say if agitations surrounding the bill can be properly addressed, it will encourage small-scale enterprises and make the people believe more in the effort of government to ensuring equity and fair play.
If a community gets 10% from what is gotten from the oil in their area, I think most communities will manage theirs properly. I think they'll be able to establish even small businesses for their people.
Going by the negative effect of oil exploration activities and the level of degradation suffered by oil-producing communities dominant in the South-South region, the PIB is seen by many as the answer to years of neglect and losses suffered by host communities. With the prospect of the increased revenue generation and running of the oil sector more like an independent business enterprise, as well as the allocation of a percentage of the revenue generated to host communities, the people are confident that if well utilized, development is sure.
This bill is very, very good. It will be very beneficial to this community, and it will improve the lives of the people of that community. It will also reduce agitations. They will give a sense of belonging to these host communities, and it will make them more in tune with the government and provide a lot more support to help this administration to do better.
The multiplier effect is obviously going to be handsome, going to benefit the people. Not talking of when you now begin to ensure that some of the subsidiaries, or if you like, the local firms that will mandatorily be participating in the oil industry must come from the local communities.
With the hope of a future assured for oil-bearing communities, going by the contents of the PIB, most Nigerians are eagerly looking forward to the straightening out of grey areas and implementation of the bill.
From Owerri, and if Professor Yinka is up again, is she up now? Okay, one other guest joining us via Zoom from United States of America is Professor Wumi Iledera, Professor Emeritus, LSU Energy Studies, United States, Executive Director, Emmanuel Egboga Foundation, Abuja. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Cool.
All being well, it sails through and the implementation is hook, line, and sinker. What prospects for the economy? Prof, can you hear me? Prof? Can we go to Professor Yinka now?
Economics, and I was trying to wait for your question. I can hear you. Okay.
Professor Yinka, can we go to Professor Yinka now? Professor Yinka, you were on the floor. You were about concluding before your signals dropped. Can you conclude, please?
I was talking about the size. You were talking about the size of the bill. And I said that a decision was taken to have one big omnibus bill because we envisaged that we knew that the whole sector was broken and that we had to fix everything. And we could see that if we broke it into bits, one bit might be passed and the rest would not be passed, and the result would be a fragmented industry that would not help the nation in any way. So we made it big. That was our decision. We said one big fight. We just did not estimate that the fight would be as big as it eventually became. So there was that. People broke it into two, then broke it into four, and Now it's back as one, because I think 10 years later, people have seen that we need to pass everything. Time is going. Things are not getting better for Nigeria. We need the bill badly. So I think it's a big bill, but we are all very literate and educated in Nigeria. Most of us, anyway. We can read and we can decipher it and we can work with it.
Wumi now. Wumi now. Is Wumi up? If you can hear me, I just said that let's take your line of thought regarding the bill that has been passed. If everything is seamless the way it is planned, what hope for the Nigerian economy?
Thank you very much again for inviting me. I hope I'm audible. Certainly, I'm going to start with a positive note, commending the National Assembly, the International Assembly. I think they did a good job having the political will to move on. I would also like to commend the executive team to a large extent for pushing and being supportive of the National Assembly. I think that's commendable. Also, look at the bill, and to a large extent, even though it is not perfect, because you cannot have a perfect bill in a political system. But at least we got something done, and the investment environment that has been clouded before can now be opened a little bit for Nigeria to be able to be attractive. Well, and then the three anchors that are very important are taken care of to a large extent, because separate the role and responsibility of each of the institutions. So you have the regulatory institution, and then you have the commercial institution. Yes, I think what we need to do is to have two objectives. One of the reasons why I decided to participate here is not necessarily to crucify the provisions there, but to find a way to make it better, so that implementation will be a lot easier. Yes, I want to say again, the bill is in no way perfect. And I want to say it over and over again. I want to say that the bill as it is now, and there's not much we can do except to look at the area of disagreement between the House and the Senate to harmonize. It's not that we want to go and design the bill, that we must be able to let the public have good understanding of some of the encumbrances in the bill that tends to be skewed towards now than the future. Well, so there are ways in which we can make sure in the harmonization process we emphasize more on prosperity than pursuit of prosperity and income redistribution, which is generating a lot of controversy. First, the office of the minister. There's nothing in this bill that will make it easy for the institution to survive a one-term minister. So we need to find a way to include something there without necessarily violating the civil service rule, that we have a technical team that can support the minister, whether it's a new one or an old one. And it's just going to take a sentence in the office of the minister that recognizes the need for a particular civil servant with adequate reward that will support the minister. So we're not going to be changing from one policy to the other. That's not difficult. Second, the role of the regulatory agency. There must be something in the provisions that I think must make them apolitical. I see the authority being too much entrenched in political games with all of the provisions that they have there. I think we need to work on that. Second, I think there must be something in that bill that supports the way in which the three institutions can meet so as not to be too protective of their power. We must find a way. I think we have a section that we call general consideration that link the two agencies that we have there. I'm not a supporter of dual regulatory systems, but I don't think we have a choice right now. That is what the two legislators approved. They won't go back to the debate. We need to find a way to make sure that the separation of roles are clearly put there. And the third one is the NMPC as a commercial institution. My opinion is this. I think we need to go back to the original bill, which I can proudly say I was part of those who actually laid the foundation for the agency role that NMPC is going to bear. So I think we can harmonize that as well.
The signals of Professor Wumi are up. We'll get back to him. Back to Professor Yinka. Professor Yinka, you heard what Professor Wumi was saying regarding the unbundling of NNPC. And just to sustain that, what should be the objective of that? Can you help us out?
Go back to the rationale for the reform. The rationale for the reform was to create an oil industry that would serve the needs of Nigeria. It was recognized that NNPC had become a cost center. It was not fulfilling its needs. It was also necessary for there to be a separation of policy, commercial, and regulatory functions. So within that, NNPC was supposed to be the full commercial arm, and that is what is behind NNPC being made into a limited liability company. That's not stricto sensu unbundling. Unbundling actually has to do with what has already been done in NNPC to a great extent, because the main NNPC is a holding company, and it has these different subsidiaries. So the idea is that it will be a commercial entity. We will wait and see how this is practically implemented, but it is something that has been in the offing for some time. In fact, there was talk about incorporated joint ventures, but that is not fully incorporated, is not fully in this particular bill that we have right now. I think really some of the problems might center not so much around that, but around whether the regulator has in fact been made a de facto regulator, because the minister is still too powerful in the bill. But the truth is that interests and so many things in Nigeria mitigate against having a regulatory body that really should be a regulatory body without recourse to the minister for different things. So that's maybe some of the tensions in the bill right now.
You speak also to the composition. What do you make of it?
What?
Well, we're having challenges with signals. Well, Professor Yinka, if you can hear me, you have just spoken to the objectives behind the transformation of NNPC into the National Petroleum Company Limited. Can we look at the composition? What do you make of it? Henceforth.
Of what do you know?
I'm talking about if you have spoken about the objectives behind what you analyzed, what do you make of the current composition of NNPC?
Because, I mean, as it is now, NNPC is functioning with an act, and it's functioning as best as it can with its different organizations, but it remains a public institution that is really still very much at the beck and call of the government. What we're trying to create through the bill is something that is more driven by commercial considerations, not totally so because of some of the problems there. What is being created as well is a national oil company that will be in tandem with what is happening all over the world, where national oil companies are no longer being held solely by the state, but they're being privatized and even held by the people as well, with people having shares so that they can become public corporations. So that is the envisaged transition. So that it won't be as opaque as it is anymore. And hopefully principles of good governance will be in operation.
Let's go to Professor Wumi. Professor Wumi, quoting the OPEC Secretary General, he has given an insight that oil will continue to be relevant up to 2045, and as against opinion from diverse views that the cleaner energy is already taking lead and oil is on its last leg. What is your take regarding this?
Sound.
With the Zoom network, let's see if we can do a bridge by taking the second report from Port Harcourt.
The past decade and a half, the Niger Delta region has been clamoring for the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill, PIB.
Now that it has been passed, I think it's fine, because that's a bill that will attract foreign direct investment to the oil and gas sector.
At the heart of the current contention is the 3% provision, contrary to the 10% canvassed by the regional leadership. Besides, the definition of host communities and the 30% oil exploration are equally a source of worry.
If they can do something about it and then improve on it, we're going to be happy.
To some observers, the joint section of the National Assembly should be able to harmonize key concerns from the region before transmitting the bill to the President for assent.
Professor Wumi's signals are up. If they're not up, then we'll go back to Professor Yinka. Professor Wumi, you were on the floor. Can you conclude on your thoughts now?
That it's debatable and subjective to say that oil is going to be relevant in 2045. I don't agree with you on that basis. I think oil is going to be part and parcel of the optimal oil supply mix for the world. And like I said in many forums, the African economy cannot afford to follow the rapid transition to zero carbon in 2050. Because right now, in that case, we are going to subject ourselves to excessive energy poverty, and the economy of Nigeria may collapse, another African economy, if we take oil out of the energy supply mix for optimality in terms of energy access, sustainability, and economic growth. And I will talk to that when time permits, because that is exactly what the investors are taking advantage of, which is what I call a very generous petroleum fiscal regime in a de-risked environment. It's shocking to me. The mutuality of interest with respect to stakeholders was subjugated away from the original intent of the fiscal framework in this petroleum industry bill. And there must be an opportunity to be able to have a provision there that will allow for what I call a review periodically. What we currently have is very, very investor friendly, and we must really think about it. I think the COVID-19 and the transition to energy really handicap the negotiation process of the fiscal framework, the terms and instrument combination that will maximize what I call benefits, mutuality of interest for all the stakeholders, the government, the investors, and the people. So when we get to fiscal framework, we'll talk more about that. But international energy transition to zero carbon in 2050 is unrealistic. It's not optimal for the emerging economies, but we must continue to talk the talk, but walk the talk of zero carbon in African economies in an optimal way. Optimize the energy supply mix. Don't abandon what you are. Otherwise, we have to import the technology, you will not have the money, and energy poverty will increase. And I think the international community is becoming aware of that. Talk the talk, but walk the talk optimally. Thank you.
I'm still on you, Professor Wumi. The point I raised this concern is, if going by climate change issues. We are talking about migration, emphasis moving from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel, clean energy. Could there be maybe some kind of proactive thinking by research institutes in the country on what can be done besides just petrol?
I agree with you, and I want people to continue to understand my position. I'm not saying we should not be conscious of the transition to energy, but let me quickly warn us. Energy does not just change dramatically like that. There are so many things that you have to put in place before you can just move from one energy source to the other. You cannot will it without infrastructure development. And there are so many parts of the world that are not there yet with respect to the type of infrastructure you will need. And I want to talk to Nigerians. If you look at the resources that you have, you do not have the infrastructure to use them effectively to develop your economy. And all these 60 years, you have looked at oil as a source of money rather than as a source of power to grow your economy. And now you want to move quickly to energy technology that you don't have. You don't even have the money to buy it. You are going to depend on foreign aid to be able to transition. So you have to put yourself together as what I call a strategic team that is apolitical, which means it's not going to be a reward system for my brother or my sister to be able to strategically think of how to move from a petroleum-dependent economy to an economy that is diversified from oil, using oil. And that's been my problem over these 50 years in this business. We cannot continue to look at oil as a source of income. And that is what this petroleum industry bill is still looking at. We are fighting over 5% submission to grow host community development when we already have a 13% derivation. We already have NDDC. We already have so many other things. Why can't you find a collective way to use this money to build infrastructure? I call it the energy corridor in the old community that we catapult the place to a completely different potential in terms of economic growth. I was expecting this bill. That is the way we started. Until, in my opinion, it was hijacked. And I blame the National Assembly for allowing the bill to spill towards the federal executive desire. They don't even have independent technical advisors anymore. So whatever the federal government team wanted is what they settled for. And that's why we have some of these provisions in the bill, in my opinion, that should be expunged. There's so many of them. Let's go back to the original bill submitted, debated, and went through public hearings. There are too many things that are there now that were not there before the public hearing. And that's why we have issues. I'm not saying we should discard it. I'm only saying that looking at energy transition and the COVID-19 implications, mutuality of interest must be optimized. And I just don't see it. So I want a bill that goes back to harmonize some of those things that were agreed upon before it was hijacked. It is skewed at this moment too much towards the investors, and he who pays the piper dictates the tone.
Thank you so much. Professor Yinka, I believe you're following the conversation now. Still in the area of maybe derivatives from crude oil, the bill appears not to be very loud. It's not very clear on the issue of gas flaring. What's your comment?
You can say it's not clear in the sense that it allows gas flaring far more than what one would want. But again, I would say it's an advancement from where we are right now. I agree that there's a lot to be... It could be a lot better. I mean, I looked through those provisions and I saw that as far as I was concerned, gas flaring was still allowed to an extent that was not appreciable. But on the other hand, when I now looked at the community trust funds later, and I saw that money that is taken from gas flaring can now be, a portion of it would be utilized towards the communities themselves. So that in itself is a bit of a positive aspect in that particular area. So I will go back. I mean, if like with when Professor Wumi was talking, and he was talking about a particular draft, I was going to ask him which draft he was talking about, because the draft he's talking about is not the original draft. And that, I think, is one of the problems that the PIB has had throughout. But I will also say, secondly, that the technical provisions of the PIB, for the most part, are not the contentious provisions, and they haven't changed much. For example, the administration of acreage, the system of the petroleum mining licenses and leases has remained largely unchanged since it came in during the interagency work. They were beautiful provisions. They've stayed there because they are basically technical and have to do with administration of acreage. Nobody has bothered with them. They haven't been political. And it's because of those sorts of provisions that I am saying we can work with the bill. Even the most contentious provisions there, which we'll probably come to at a point, the percentages they're talking about, we can actually work with them to a great extent, because some of them at a point can be rendered completely meaningless to an extent. When one is talking about 30%, for example, the 30% for frontier basins is not 30% of profits per se. It's 30% of rents, the rent amounts that are payable on the PPLs, and that is the petroleum prospecting licenses and the petroleum mining leases. What is that? That's something that the petroleum economists and the petroleum accountants should work out and let us know. What's 30% of the profit oil? And what do they mean? Profit oil and profit gas. What would it come out as? We need to know some of those things. So it's not so straightforward as to say, 30% of NNPC's profits. It's not so at all. The same way when one is talking about the amounts for the host communities, if you actually look, it's not quite the same. They are talking about 5% of actual operating costs for the previous year. What does that really amount to? So we need to know some of these things and look at them holistically and see how we can interpret, how we can actually put these things into operation. But what I still will say is that if there's a mind to make this work and to actually implement in such a way that Nigeria benefits, then we will be able to move forward to an extent.
I'm still with you. I'm happy you touched on the 30% funding. Clearly here it is said funding mechanism of 30% of NNPC Limited, oil and gas profit in the production sharing, profit sharing, and risk service contracts to fund exploration of frontier basins. You have touched on it, but could you maybe, for the sake of the clarity, explain to Nigerians what this portends or what this means?
Frontier basins are all over the country. There is just an undue concentration on the ones in the north, but they exist all over the country, and the geologists will be able to tell us better. Now they're talking about 30% of the rent, the rent that is payable. Rent amounts are payable by the different oil companies to the government. To the best of my knowledge, every time I have looked at actual figures, they are not actually big, fantastic figures that come out from the rents that are paid for PPLs, petroleum prospecting licenses, and petroleum mining leases. Now, 30% of NNPC Limited's profit oil and profit gas, and from the risk service contracts as well. What does that really amount to? What I can see is that they're not talking about 30% of the proceeds from the joint venture operations. Until now, most of our money comes from the joint ventures. It is 30% of rents that are payable that will come if they're coming from the JVs. So it's not as much money as we're looking at. Secondly, they are all the frontier basins. What we should be doing is making a case for exploration of all the frontier basins. It's important for us. It's important for us to do this. This actually is my position on both of them. And as regards the community funds area, I have a lot of contentions with that. Let nobody think that, oh, I believe it's perfect. I think that there are a lot of issues, but I always start off with, we can work with it. The consequences of nothing are dire. That's just the problem. Whether one likes it or not, there is a march towards net zero, and it will take a lot of strategizing and work. But the different countries are doing it, and the countries that are doing it are IEA countries, the consumer countries that have the money and that they have the technology, and they recognize that the work is awesome. I want to encourage a lot of people to actually go and read the IEA report, the short report and the long report. In fact, just the short one will let you see that they know that the work is humongous, but they're ready to start it. So we need to strategize and make sure, like Prof has said, that we spend our money on development and not spend the money realized from the oil industry on development. And, you know, not just be thinking in terms of revenues, because that is what has sunk us, and that is what has made us a country with some of the worst indicators, sustainable development indicators in the world, with the worst electricity in the world, with, I mean, bad lists, we top them. Good lists were at the bottom. We have to change that completely. And having a viable industry, whilst oil is still very, very relevant and marketable, is really, really important for us as Nigerians.
Prof, we'll come back to the issue of the community percentage and what have you. Now, you have touched on an area I want to take to Professor Wumi now. Professor Wumi, let's look at local content in terms of capacity building and direct response to dividend well-being of Nigerians. You touched on development away from just looking at revenue, but development. So what about local content? What prospects?
Again, let me quickly just make a remark with respect to this 30%. You have 10% of rent, and you have 10% of lease administration. Then you have 10% of profit oil. The profit oil is the difference between the total revenue minus cost oil, minus royalty oil, and at times minus tax oil. And whatever remains is profit oil. And 30% of it is for the frontier basin. And of course, then to me, it boils down to petroleum revenue management. If the PIB was rejected, the cost of 10% that was earmarked for institutions, I don't see the validity of this 30% being earmarked for frontier exploration. Yes, it is correct. I think we have about 8 basins in Nigeria, and even the Niger Delta is inclusive with respect to going to ultra deep. I think this is going to be debatable. And if the governance will not allow a proportion of federation account to go to sovereign wealth fund and fighting, I just don't understand why this should be in the bill in the first place, especially when you are going to NMPC limited. I would have expected the government to create what we call suspension of ring fencing, and that's what we've done in the past. Because what we need to do with money should not be with respect to chasing the wind, because the likelihood of discovery of petroleum in an unexplored basin is very low. And so that's where we need to look at the priorities, keeping in view this net zero carbon emission in the future. I'm not opposed to exploration, but you can get people who are not risk averse to spend their money to chase this type of wind with the hope that they will find something. More so in a place that we've done for over 60 years. Some of these basins have been explored. So we need to
Well, we'll get back to Professor Gumi to complete on his line of thought. He was actually heading towards engaging on local content and capacity building away from just looking at profit from the oil and gas sector in Nigeria. Well, it's Tuesday Live and our phone lines are open. You can make a call. Please, when doing this, turn down the volume of your television set in contributing. You can be also part of the discussion tonight to our social media handle, Instagram, Facebook, at NTA Network, and on Cool at NTA News. Now, Professor Yinka, you touched briefly on host community and the percentage of its development fund, but for now, there is no harmonization. Senate has approved 3% and House of Reps is still at 5%. We hear the harmonization process is on now. But let's sustain the, what in effect would be the purpose of this fund?
In fact, I think that a lot of time has to be spent on the community trust funds talking about that, because one has to make sure that it will really achieve the purported purposes that it has been designed for. First of all, there will be several of these funds, and they will be in respect of the acreage that is being managed, or that has been over which a particular company has rights. And that company, those companies are called settlers. So they have something called a settler there. And you'll find that the settler is actually very, very strong and is the one who more or less manages the trust fund. And that settler is the company. The company and the trust fund essentially, I mean, if one goes to the provisions of the bill, you will find that the settler itself is the one that establishes the trust fund and ensures that the people basically is in control of the trust funds. And I think that is a little bit of a problem. In fact, for me, the 5% of the actual operating costs is to be used in a way that is mentioned in the bill, and the percentages are stated there. But how well this is going to work in future, I honestly do not know. What I really think is that people need to sit down and work on it. The only thing is that I would say that I remember decades ago, about at least 20-something years ago, I talked and was working on trust funds. I actually did a consultancy paper on it for a UN organization, because the idea itself is very good. It's a question of how it is operated. I believe the settler is too big and too large and too strong, and that for me is an issue. But the problem is with the petroleum industry bill, there are just some issues that are looming large, and they're not talking about some of these other issues, such as that which Professor Eledari, some of the ones he has raised. They're not bringing up some of these things. For me, the operation of the funds is actually very, very important. The 5% of actual operating expenditure that is to be paid by the oil companies, how much is it? We need to know how much is it. How feasible is it? Would we ever be able to get 30% of actual operating expenditure from any oil company? I don't think so. We need to think about ways of funding. I think we probably need to be very innovative. But again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think if this can move, we can start off with something, whether it's 3% or 5%. We really need to see the harmonized bill. And I think that is when one will really be able to talk more, because we will be talking about a harmonized draft that will be taken to the presidency. We assume that it will not be changed again until the president signs it.
Yes, but Prof, you still need to hit the nail on the head while we wait for the signals of Professor Wumi to come up. I simply asked and said, purpose of this fund, could you maybe guide us so that Nigerians will get to know? There's so much concerns about it, 3%, 5%, harmonization process is on, but we want to understand if the harmonization has taken place, what would be the purpose of this fund? Just simplify it for us.
To actually take you to the provisions right now. So we have the host community development funds, chapter 3 from section 234. We have these funds here that will be the funds of the trust. So first of all, there are going to be, sorry, let me just make sure that I see this. The set law is to incorporate a trust for the benefit of the host communities. And this is the Host Community Development Fund. So this fund itself is going to be set up by the settlor. He is going to appoint and authorize the trustees, which shall apply to be registered by the commission. Now, and this let me go down. And there's a time frame for the operation. There's a time frame for the incorporation of the Host Communities Trust Fund. Now, what are the objectives of this trust fund? The fund is, first of all, and this section was retained, is to finance and execute projects for the benefit and sustainable development of the host communities. Then it's to undertake infrastructural development of the host communities within the scope of funds available to the Board of Trustees for such purposes. It's to facilitate economic empowerment opportunities in the host countries, in the host communities. It's to advance educational development, again, in those communities. It's to support healthcare development, local initiatives, for the community, for the protection of the environment, to enhance security. So it's to do many different things. In fact, if you look, to an extent, the trust fund is to do a lot of things that really the government itself is to be doing. So this is now, the major issue. And what are we saying? We're saying that the settlor will make an annual contribution, and he will make a contribution, that company will make a contribution of an amount equal to 3% if you're in one house, or 5% if you're in another house. But the bill itself talked about 2.5% of actual operating expenditure in the immediately preceding calendar year. So there will be certainty about it, because you will just look at what they spent last year, and then you bring out that percentage. So we'll now have to see what that percentage actually covers and how much it can, how much it can actually do. But that fund can also take donations, gifts, grants from anybody as well, and of course it will take profits and interest that are accruing to the fund itself. So you have this amount there, and it's to be set aside and to be used for all these different things. So I think these are what we actually need to be looking at. Are we happy with that, or are we not happy with that? Like I've said, the settlor is too strong. That is just the truth of the matter. I have huge issues with that, and I honestly wonder whether that itself will stand. Now, the funds themselves, how are they to be allocated? The Board of Trustees of the Trust Fund is going to ensure that the funds are allocated in this way, sort of. Now, 75% is going to a capital fund for the different projects there. 20% is going to a reserve fund, and then another amount not exceeding 5% is going to be utilized solely for the administrative costs for running the trust and special projects. So that is how it has been divided.
Let me hold the I'll come back to you. Quite interesting there, but the concern, my next line of action to Professor Wumi would be, if all this listed by Professor Yinka is anything to go by, if there are no safeguards, will it work? But let's take this caller from Port Harcourt. I hear, is it Nsikak? It's calling from Port Harcourt. Effiok is calling from. We lost that caller there. If Professor Wumi is up, I go to him now to other issues. Okay, Professor Zumi, you heard what Professor Yinka said, and shortly after you respond, we shall be joining Austin Avuru, who is also joining us via Zoom tonight. If the list of the purpose for the fund in the community as listed by Professor Yinka is anything to go by, if there are no safeguards, will the implementation work?
Well, I think so. I think, first of all, this solution to the community development is homegrown and it is laudable. And the National Assembly is commended for this local solution to a local problem. My only contention is the amount of money being earmarked for this particular laudable approach to meeting that stakeholder's requirement. One, and quickly, is the fact that you have an heterogeneous producing groups in Nigeria. You have some big companies whose operating expenses are not stochastic. Then you have small producers, and they are producing in communities that will really need this amount of money. I would have preferred, again, I'm not saying this is go back. That's something for the future. I would have preferred the surrendering of money directly from the government. I agree with Professor Yinka with respect to the settlers' role. But do you blame them? They contribute about 3% of their technical cost to NDDC. But look at what NDDC is today. Nearly everybody that has added NDDC has gotten into trouble. And yet it is 3% of the technical cost. Although it's deductible for tax purposes. And that's what informed, and I happen to be part and parcel of those who developed this new approach. That's what informed us. What can we do so that there will be a direct benefit to the host community? Look at 13% derivation. There has been no trickle down to the host community. I wish to God that the political system was strong enough to surrender part of that 13% and part of that 3% directly to fund these communities. Not going to be debating how the police need to do the right thing. This host community is the bedrock for even the budget 2022, which is asking for 1.8 million barrels per day, assuming a $57 per barrel. The money to fund Nigerian development going forward is not from the deep water, it's from the JV. And that JV is becoming smaller and smaller because those communities are not taken care of. Let us surrender part of this revenue to the government instead of taking another cost. You have heterogeneous producers. The operating cost is stochastic, the coefficient of variation is so high, and it's highly unstable way to fund the type of project that will liberate and bring the host community to par with other countries' community producing oil. That is just my take. But the idea is laudable. The structure and how the money is going to be spent is well stated. 75% for capital development. And then you have what they call heritage funds and you have operating expenses. But the settler is too much in charge. And that is the government's problem. Because the government is not contributing anything directly. It's the operators that are still putting a percentage of the operating cost over and above the NDDC technical cost. It's not equitable. It's not. We need to think and take responsibility to develop our people and not transfer it to investors. In fact, we need to begin to hold the state government accountable for not developing those communities. It's their responsibility. They take all the 13% and what are they doing with it? And nobody is doing anything to second them. That's just my opinion. But the bill is still good. It may not be perfect. And I will continue to say that we must not throw it away. But the implementation strategy must be inclusive and be apolitical if we want to deliver. I hope we have the political will to do the right thing. That would be my comment with respect to the host community funding and the project. The framework is well defined, far better than what you have with how to use the derivation fund and how to use LGGC funds, or even Ministry of Niger Delta. This is what we need to go back and amend all of those funding sources so that those communities can get direct benefits from those funds. 13% derivation, surrender 10% of it to those communities. 3% technical funds, surrender 10% of it to those communities. The state budget, surrender some percentage of this to those communities, and then put this settlers fund to it, and we see what will happen. It will just be like Houston area, where you have energy corridor in the Niger Delta that everybody will want to go and be part of it. And you'll be surprised, oil will flow. But if you don't develop them, forget it. The agitation will continue. And finally, actually wish we have the political will to surrender 10-20% of the royalty revenue to those communities. And the ownership agitation would disappear. Well, this is probably late. It's not part of the bill right now. We can think about that in the future. But that is the way to put posterity in this debate. This bill is about the future, not about now.
Prof, our second caller, we lost our first caller in terms of signals, and our second caller is calling from Benin Kebbi, Uma. Hello, Uma.
Hello?
Hello, Uma. Could you please turn down the volume of your television set, please?
Hello?
Hello, Uma. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Before
you.
you make your contribution, could you turn down the volume of the television set, please?
I'm not close to TV set.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Make your contributions.
Okay, thank you. My name is Umar Mohammed Anati, calling from Birnin Kebbi. Please, educate me. In what ways all this grammar that you are blowing, how does it benefit a common man in the street? What is the benefit a common man will get as a result of passing this bill? That is my own question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uma. And at this point, I'll say, when we come back from the break, we'll go to Professor Yinka to respond to Uma's question.
Sometime we never see the kind things Nigeria they make. E no reach wetin we dey shop later. We even dey use $22 billion take bring things from Obodo Oyinbo every year. To bring better come inside we Obodo Nigeria, na so our government arrange them import policy come. Now, for us to survive, we must to learn how to feed we serve. So far, that plan don't nearly work finish. Sake of CBN we stand gidiga to support local farmers and small market people. Our plan to give 10 million people work with 12 products under 5 years don't dey pure. We fit to do am. Make we buy Nigeria to grow Nigeria. Call your banker today for more information on how to get involved.
Nigerian youths are about the greatest assets the country has at the moment. It is therefore not surprising that the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari is strategically responding to the yearnings of the youth through multiple projects and programs. Youth Entrepreneurship Support Years by Bank of Industry, the Youth Investment Fund by the CBN, and several other conditional cash transfer programs. Recruitment of 774,000 social workers, majority of whom are youth. scholarships, and so many other projects that are beneficial to youths directly or indirectly. If the administration can do all this, definitely with a degree of patience and time, it can achieve more. Nigerian youths must come together to say no to terrorism, no to vandalism, and no to all disruptive tendencies. Hashtag Youth for Greater Nigeria. Pacifying the youths, unifying the nation.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
In tuned, and the focus tonight is PIB and matters arising. Just joining us on the program tonight also is Austin Afuru, former MD Seplat. Good to have you on the program. Well, Austin, if you have been following through the discussion, what's your own opinion regarding the passage of the PIB eventually?
And it's nice to see Professor Yinka because she was the author of, I don't know which version of the PIB about 10 years ago. So, and she will tell you that what has just been passed into law when it's accented to by the president is a far cry from the version that that she wanted passed into law. I must say that there's been a lot of courage in drafting and passing this PIB. It's a very generous piece of legislation from point of view of the fiscal regime. I'm sure that Prof herself will be surprised at how generous the fiscal terms are, whether it is royalty, whether it is the tax regime and all the production bonuses. I don't think operators can complain anymore about attracting funding into the sector, even at low oil prices, even at $40 oil prices. There's sufficient fiscal guidance and fiscal protection for injection of capital into the sector. But specifically referring to the host community bill, the host community section of the bill. But my problem with the debate about the host community section is it's almost been like a debate between a discussion between a deaf and a dumb. When somebody says, "Oh, I earn 50,000," and you don't tell me whether it's 50,000 naira, or it's $50,000, or it's 50,000 yen, it doesn't make any sense to me. So on the one hand, you say the host communities are asking for 10%. 10% of what? 10% of what? Some say they're asking for 10% equity. 10% of equity in an operating company doesn't give the host community one dime. I know investors that have 20% equity in some of the operating companies and haven't earned any dividend, 1 cent dividend for the past 5 years. If you have equity in a company, all you can get is dividend when that company makes profit and declares dividend. That's all you get. It's not specific, it's difficult to audit. So why would you ask for 10% equity instead of 5% or 3% of operating costs? I do not understand it. So if anybody is asking for, when they say 10%, 10%, I need to know 10% of what? Anybody who is asking for 10% equity does not know what he's saying, and he doesn't know, he's not doing his community any good or any favor. Just to put that very, very clearly. Now let's go back to the 3 or 2.5, as Prof said. The bill itself recommended 2.5%. They have opted to somewhere between 3 and 5%. But let me say this. So when people are making these arguments, you should be able to simulate the actual figures. Any company, any responsible company that has been very proactive in handling its host community and has been devoting funds transparently into working with the host communities. If you work out the figures, you find out it's somewhere between 2 and 5% of your operating operating costs. That's what you spend every year. Pick any company who's been doing the right thing. I'm talking about companies that have minimal disruption in their activities because they are in harmony with their host communities. In the 10 years that I ran CEPLAT, since 2013 till date, we haven't had disruptions in activities from host communities. We're at peace with them. We spend money for them. We spend money with them. We have a joint committee and we're joint signatories to the fund where we put in this money. And it's transparent how we spend it, and both parties are happy. If I pick out the figures for each year that we spend and check what my OPEX is each year, it's in that ballpark. It's in the ballpark that you are seeing in the bill. So for companies like CEPLA that have been very responsible to their host communities, whether it is 3% or 5%, it's not much different from what they've been spending. So there'll be nothing new to them. The real essence of this bill is that it then compels everybody to be as responsible as those who have been doing the right thing. Because while some companies have been doing the right thing, other companies just spend next to nothing. They just placate a few people and move on. Now you are compelled to put aside a certain amount of money for that host community. And any responsible operator that spends that money properly in the projects, 25% for put it aside as an investment for the community, and 5% to manage the process itself. And that's about the structure the way it is. So I have no quarrel whatsoever. Whether it's 3%, is better to be 5%, but to tell you the truth, whether it's 3% or 5%, if it is properly spent, properly administered by both sides, both the operator and settler and the community representatives that make up the committee, if it is properly spent, that is not small money. But let me also say this, so just so that we know the difference between a disciplined administration of funds and squandering funds. And if funds are not properly administered, it doesn't matter the quantum. Again, if you simulate the total figure of what goes to NDDC, what goes as 13%, what goes to Ministry of Niger Delta, and now what is going to host communities. If we administered all of these funds properly, the Niger Delta today will be, it's not much more money than that the Arabs spent in transforming Dubai from a desert into what it is today. So it's okay to ask for more money, but more importantly, let's question how we've administered them. Because if we don't address that, whether we're giving 10% of OPEX or we're giving 2% of OPEX, it will go down the drain. So some of what I'm saying is, I am satisfied with the sum set aside for the host community. I'm satisfied, even though it's too cumbersome, with the way it is administered. But it boils down to how responsible the operator, working with the host community representatives, how responsible are they in applying that funds to the development of that community. If they are responsible, you will see results, because we've done it, and we know that you will see results and the communities will be happy with you.
And one other question I will ask you before we proceed to Professor Yinka to respond to Umar's concerns is what of product availability to the people and pricing, as it were, with all this? Is it possible that with all this development, we could still have issues of scarcity of products in the market?
Products is because of a market system that government has insisted on controlling. When I go to my 12 market to buy yam, nobody controls the price there. I buy the yam that I can afford and bring it home for my family to feed. When you go to the petrol station to buy diesel for your generator, or for that matter, the part of the transportation network that caters for the poor people, the motorways and all the trucks and so on, they run on diesel. In the past 12 years, diesel has been deregulated, and nobody's quarreling about that. We're talking about petrol that only the elites who have cars use, and you insist on regulating it and making it scarce. It doesn't work, it has never worked, it has never benefited anybody. The sector must be deregulated, and when it is deregulated, people can afford to be efficient. You know how to drive your car and use the minimum volume of petrol that you can, because you're paying the market price for it. It is not for people who have big 12-cylinder cars and so on, and you subsidize how much petrol they use. And whereas the buses that are carrying the masses are buying diesel at market price. It doesn't make sense. It has never made sense to me. For the past 20 years, I've been preaching deregulation and I've been writing about it. Now, if you deregulate, the products will be available. They might be expensive at sometimes when crude oil prices are high, and lower prices when crude oil prices are low. But the whole idea of regulating it has never made sense to me. Like I said, you go market to buy yam. Nobody is telling the person coming from bringing yams from the middle belt to say this is the price you must sell it. Well, you can't deregulate what you have no control over. You don't have refineries that are functioning. You just produce crude. You have no control over all the other forces about refining them and bringing them to the market. And you sit back in your office and fix a price. It's always been, look, it's never made sense, and I hope that this time around we'll drop the deregulation. It will take more than 2 years of agitations here and there. We'll get used to buying products that are deregulated. We'll get used to it the same way we'll get used to buying kerosene for our stoves and buying diesel for our generators. We'll get used to it, and the market and the populace will be better off for it.
Professor Yinka went on break. Umar called in from Benin Kebbi, and his concern was with all the high-floating English we are speaking, all the models, approaches we are talking about regarding PIB. What is in there for the common man? That was Umar's concern. Can you educate us?
Well, I have to say that what's in it for the common man, the passage of the PIB? Nothing at all. Once a bill is passed, nothing. There is no change once a bill has been passed. It is when you have an act that has been implemented that there can be anything like change. So there's no euphoria, no happiness. You say, well, great, we've laid down a framework, we have a legal framework, so that's something. But the common man will see some sorts of benefits. I would have to say that once we stop looking at the oil industry as merely a revenue earner, but as a means for sustainable development, then the common man, all of us will see a difference. You see this horrible electricity that we have. We shouldn't have it this way. Some of the things Mr. Aburu talked about, they should not be that way. We should not even be talking about importing. Being a country that has a lot of crude oil, sells its crude, imports products, there's something wrong with that, something very, very wrong. So you'll find that when we're implementing, there's certain things in the bill that should give us some pleasure. And I just want to mention one or two. For example, the domestic crude oil obligations, the domestic natural gas obligations that make it compulsory for certain amounts to be utilized here. The problem is we've been selling everything out and leaving Nigeria not covered at all. So once we have that, there will be crude oil for the different things that we need to do. There will be gas. There will be gas available for the different gas projects that we need to do, that we need to have in Nigeria. It should impact on the electricity sector, although that is another story, but it's essential for us. We shouldn't be buying, we shouldn't all have generators in the first place. Our poor should not be living on kerosene. And if the bill is implemented correctly, a lot of these concerns will be addressed, because for the first time, the downstream, the area of the industry that actually impacts on us in Nigeria will be covered by legislation and will be covered by an open system, an open, transparent system. So what I will say is that if it's implemented well, there should be an easing of life. We know life is really, really difficult for those that, the ordinary man, the common man. It's difficult in different ways for practically everybody living in Nigeria. But the implementation should help make things better. And that is why we all should never rejoice when a bill has been passed and made an act. It's a meaningless document until it's implemented and the provisions are actually applied.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let's now go to Professor Wumi. Professor Wumi, impact of the new regime on Nigeria's global competitiveness and capital investment in the sector with focus on enhanced tax incentives. How do you react to that?
Well, I think like I mentioned earlier, I think the bill is very general in itself. If we begin with the instruments that are usually used, the combination of them, there are three things you look at when you have fiscal regime or fiscal instruments. You look at royalty, you look at taxes, and then you look at incentives. One thing that you are going to see in the bill is that the reward is no longer based on effort in the Assembly PIB 7. And production, in the past, we wanted to create some additional incentives if we're able to add more reserves, but that one is truncated. Now there are provision there to reward effort in terms of capitalization of your expenditure, and you can even deduct your exploration activity that will can be deducted where you spend it. And then you can have what I think is suspension of hydrocarbon tax for PSC and deep offshore, which I think is extremely general. And then you even have a royalty that is low and progressive. And I think this the fiscal regime, in my opinion, is extremely competitive. We used to be stuck right in the middle compared to the other people competing with us. But I think now we are, in my opinion, progressive. We've moved away from the terrain. We've also moved away from a single tax that makes cost savings not attractive. Now the tax is now broken into two and even is suspended for deep water. And now it's just maybe about 30% corporate income tax and less than 30% from and the 65% tax in the onshore baby oil to those and aggregate, even though they are not addictive of an effective tax rate that is going to be below 60% when you calculate it. So there's no doubt. I think just like when you go in those days, you are a young person, you are fighting, and before they start, somebody just cut your leg. I think this COVID-19 and this zero was an instrument that was used to negotiate this type of generous fiscal regime, which is okay. Can we then get the investors to respond to us? So that has been the argument from what I call the Revenue Federation account up before that they gave up. And I think it's good. I don't particularly like not doing a framework that is flexible and dynamic. I will have put some of these taxes there and then just create a tax holiday. I mean, they did it to Abuja company with pioneer tax, which they then paid significantly back revenue to the government as a result of that pioneer tax that has a fixed time. That's what I would have loved to see, instead of saying that no royalty for hydrocarbon, I mean for gas, no hydrocarbon tax for deep offshore. I think that was overtly too general. I'm not saying we should go back and debate it, and that's why I'm calling for a provision that will allow us to review these things as the dynamics of the oil and gas industry change over time. Let me quickly make comments with respect to this local content. I think that's another aspect of this bill that we're not paying attention to. I think one of the best things that have ever happened in the oil and gas industry in Nigeria is the local content policy. And of course, we've gotten good two executive directors that have done extremely well over these last 10 years to make sure that this thing is not punitive at all. It's even good for the industry. I remember the company that I worked for when I was a young man some 40 years ago. The intention was to make sure that 95% of the employees to the senior staff management are from Nigeria. Until we did so many things with our policies that screwed it up. There are so many things that are good in this bill. There are certain things we can work on in the harmonization phase that will make even the bill move towards the type of things you want to see, keeping posterity in view. And I think the local content aspect is excellent because it creates a great multiplier effect if you can retain some earnings back in the domestic economy. And you can see it with Post EMP, with Seplat, with Platform, with Energia, the type of impact they've created in the community in which they have operated because they are domestic. I mean, Abu just mentioned that over the last 12 years, there have not been any disruption. The same thing with Niger Delta Petroleum EMP, because they have found a way to make the host community inclusive in the ability to help them. So when you let somebody get involved in what you are doing to provide solutions to their problems, things work well. And that's going to be just my encouragement. I want to emphasize again, like Professor Yinka said, it is one thing to have a bill. It is one thing to translate the bill into an act, but another thing to make the implementation effective. Nigeria has not been very good at that. And the reason is what we need to kill is called prebendalism. If we are able to kill prebendalism in Nigeria, my friend, the sky is our limit. What is dragging us back is not being inclusive in the implementation of strategies that will take us out. There's no better place to be or to invest than Nigeria. I can testify to that. Even the companies, they know that. You have the human capacity, you have friendly environment, and you have a jolly good fellow. If you just stop some of these syndromes, just today, without keeping the future in perspective. And let me quickly answer, and I'll keep quiet now. Let me answer directly to my friend from I think probably from the north. What is the benefit of an act that is well implemented? One, your roads that are bad because of petroleum subsidy, 1 trillion naira every year over the last 10 years will be improved upon. The type of education I had when I went to Federal Government College, Sokoto, from 49 years ago, you'll be able to go to King's College. The type of medical facility you are supposed to have that you don't have now. If this act is properly implemented, I put my money down, you will see the minimization of social welfare loss that we've experienced over the last 10 years because of the mismanagement of petroleum resources. This petroleum industry bill, in my opinion, despite the limitations, if properly implemented, and all of those things that are interjected in it, from the public hearing to now, they are removed. Then you can be sure that what we are going to see is an improvement in the petroleum sector that has a great multiplier effect that can have an intergenerational implication. It just began with good implementation. And a good implementation depends on inclusiveness and the killing of Easter syndrome and the abandonment of prebendalism. Try it, and it will work. The society will be better off if this act is passed and all of those encumbrances in the upstream regulator in NMCC Limited are minimized to the extent that political expediency will allow it to happen. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Austin, listening to Prof, I want to ask you this. In the overall, will the foreign earnings accruing from oil will fare better with the PIB. And Professor Yinka and Wumi have talked about the fact that it is time now we look beyond just profit revenue, and look at other benefits we can make from the windfall from whatever we get from oil. So besides the revenue, how the revenue from the foreign revenue from these, what else can we do besides profit?
Thank you. There was a very fundamental point that Professor Morgan made. Professor Wumi later repeated it. The real fundamental shift with this bill, which is probably the reason they were so generous in the fiscal regime. I mean, to put it straight away, the deep water operators will go from paying 50% tax to paying 30% tax, because they won't pay hydrocarbon tax, they pay CID. When you look at the onshore JVs, after 5 years, you ordinarily, even marginal field operators, pay 85% tax after 5 years. The tax regime now for marginal field operators, when you throw in the production bonus, will be somewhere between 45 and 50%. For normal JV operators, the tax regime goes from 85% to about 60% after 5 years. In fact, the 60% is still lower than even the newcomer tax of 65.75. Now, on top of that, NNPC keeps 20% of their profit in JVs as working capital, and essentially keeps 40% of profit from PSCs, because they keep 10% as working capital and 30% for frontier development, because it's their money. You know, people have turned the argument into a north and south. Oh, you're keeping the money to develop the frontier. That money belongs to an NPC. The only difference is that I've told you that they will use it for frontier exploration. If they drill only one well in a year in the frontier, they will keep the rest of the money. The money is not going to be distributed to northern states if they drill only one well. So the bill is also generous in how much money NNPC retains. Now, what's the full impact? Again, if you do this simulation on a barrel basis, the amount of percentage, but not less than 20%. However, which is what the point Professor Morigwe was making, we are now moving away, because we must move away from the oil and gas industry being just a contributor of revenue, just a rental industry contributing revenue to the federation account. We are moving away to bringing investments in the industry to stimulate activities in other sectors of the economy. So if by this act, you start consuming 3 BCF of gas domestically instead of 300 million score for 1 BCF as we're doing today, that will reflect in 15 gigawatts of electricity instead of 4 gigawatts. That will reflect in export of fertilizers. That will reflect in export of cement. That will reflect in export of petrochemicals and urea and coal and so on and so forth. That is the full import. But if you were to look at it the way we have seen it in the past 50 years, where all we see is what is the total contribution into the federation account. 80% of our budget comes from just rents, royalties, and taxes from the oil and gas industry. If you were to look at it from that point of view, tomorrow the fair complexion doctor that manages our budget is going to scream that he's seeing less money than he was seeing before. So when he sees less money than he was seeing before, he should not scream. That is the intention. The intention is that we're moving the industry away from being a rental contributor to being a stimulator or a facilitator for the larger economy, so that you then earn more money from taxes from those who are productive in the economy to fund your budget. That's already happened. If you look at the contribution of oil and gas to 2019 budget, it's 47%. The 2020 budget, it was down to 42%. You know, away from those glory days when oil and gas contributed between 70 and 80% of the federal budget. So we're already moving away from the oil and gas just being direct contributors to the industry to oil and gas being a stimulator. And that's what this bill emphasizes. And I'm saying this with emphasis so that when people see less money directly from the oil and gas going into the federation account, they should not scream. That is intention. Intention is that even though the oil and gas contribution will be less, but its overall impact in the larger economy will be a lot more. That is the intention. That's, if it's implemented properly, that's what this bill is meant to do to the larger economy.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Professor Yinka. Professor Yinka, everywhere, everybody is happy. Nigerians are happy that eventually this bill sent to the National Assembly in 2008 has finally seen the light of day. It will be assented eventually if everything is harmonized between the Senate and House of Representatives. It will be assented by the President. What kind of attitude should Nigerians be putting up now? Are we ready to accept and allow the bill domicile and function seamlessly?
Well, I would say yes, we have to be, but what should we be doing now? We should be advocating for the passage of the bill and its implementation. At this point, we should be concerned with what the final bill is, because we don't have the final one yet. We still have harmonization. And the truth is that the legislators can do anything they like with a bill, anything at all. So anything could actually happen. So it's important for us to follow the process very much as Nigerians. It's important for us to support the passage for once. It's good to break this jinx. I mean, 13 years is long enough to be standing in one spot whilst the world is moving on and passing us by, and we're getting poorer, and our development indicators are worsening, and so many things are going wrong. We need to be able to do something functional with our oil, do something that will impact on us and make a difference. And so I'm just saying that we need to all be advocates for the passage of the bill, even as we're talking about the areas in the bill that we believe cannot stand.
Let's get your perspective. What should we be doing now as this bill is on its way to become an act?
Or Professor Ilodare? Me?
First of all, we need to understand that this is a political process. Second, we need to understand that there are people who are not going to be better off if this bill is passed. And those people are those with quite a lot of power to make it more difficult for the president to sign this bill. And like Madam President of NTA said, from the time even they agree to when that bill gets to the president's desk, a lot of things could happen. It happened in the past, even with Nigerian constitution. And so that's where transparency and accountability is so critical. And that's where the press must be on the watch and be able to also educate the public as to what is it. In fact, it took me a long time to finally get even the Senate version of the bill. And so you must be the first arm of the democracy. And I know it's difficult for you, but you have a role to play to make sure that you snoop around, find out if anything is being smuggled into it, and report it, and not necessarily agitate. We do not, in my opinion, have any choice than to let this bill go through the process and become an act. That is just the first step. The next step is strategic implication to add value. We have all agreed, even though I may depart from what Engineer Boru said, with surrendering that much money directly to be looking for exploration with the road that's going to add value. I would have preferred a petroleum revenue management act that has a priority project that can help us meet the upcoming challenges from energy transition. The time that we had in the 70s, when children of different backgrounds were able to go to the same school and form collegiality that made us not to experience what we are experiencing now with divide and rule tactics. Because we now have parallel everything. And that's what I think that this bill will help us if the money is not surrendered from the revenue from the federation account for this. But it can help us to diversify the economy by paying less attention to sharing and more attention to infrastructure development from the center. And to me, this is what is important with respect to this Petroleum Act. Let us take bill, let us take the monkey off our back and then begin to think in terms of how best can we have a Petroleum Revenue Management Act that is constitutionally valid for us to move away from this stagnant economic structure that has ended up sending many of us that are very, very capable away from the country. And finally, if I can make this other contribution, is the petroleum industry needs this bill to be able to prepare for the diversification of Nigeria's economy if we are going to continue to be relevant going forward. If we don't go ahead with the passage of this bill, despite its limitations, we'll be sending a wrong signal to the global world economy that we are not representing the race we're supposed to represent. Because Nigeria is symbolic
of the black race.
And the oil and gas industry has put us on the map. We just unfortunately we've not played that game as effectively as possible. I just for joking, if Nigeria does not participate in World Cup, the world is not happy. If we don't participate in Olympics, the world is not happy. We don't seem to understand the essence of who we are with all of this elaborate going around that are irrelevant to the type of conceptual idealism that brought us into existence. We represent a race, and the oil and gas industry has been the instrument that is catapulting us. We cannot allow it to collapse. Otherwise, Venezuela experience is not worth having. Let us reform this industry. Let us pass this bill with its limitations and give the future a booming experience for our younger generation. They are not experiencing what we experienced when we were managing this industry well in the 1970s. Let us find a way to go back to that. And that to me is what I think. And I've been a player since 2008 as an external reviewer. I became an internal participant and now an external reviewer. This is something worth trying for the sake of posterity. Thank you.
Prof, let's go to Austin. Austin, you are a player in the industry, so let's look at the up and downstream platforms of the industry. The establishment of the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission to provide technical regulatory functions that would enforce, administer and implement laws, regulations and policies relating to upstream petroleum operations. The establishment of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, which shall be responsible for the technical and commercial regulation of midstream and downstream operations in the petroleum industry in Nigeria. Will it bring about any difference?
Yes. First of all, let me say that some people They argue that both of them should have been merged into one commission, but that's neither here nor there. They split into an upstream commission and a midstream stroke downstream agency. I don't particularly see anything wrong with that. What is important is that the establishment of these two bodies to be supervised by the Honorable Minister of Petroleum has created the process mechanism that we have always advocated. So discretionary allocation of blocks, for instance, are not envisaged under this. Everything, just about everything you do, from all the approvals you require as an operator in the upstream, to whether you are bidding for a block, you are relinquishing. And let me even say this, people, if you look at the final details of the bill, it's very difficult to operate a block, to keep a block without working the block. It's very difficult now. Once it's converted to a PML, there is a work program, there is a timing to the execution of the work program, otherwise you relinquish. So there's going to be the activity level in the upstream ought to go up several notches because you either operate your block or you relinquish it. We no longer have the situation where you can keep a block for 20 years, drill one or two exploration wells over 20 years, and still keep the block. That is gone. So if again implemented well, the commission will bring a lot of discipline, a lot of normalcy in terms of process mechanism into the administration of the upstream. And whatever they do and whatever they recommend to the minister is what is available for the minister to approve or not approve. So a lot of discretionary powers of the minister have been taken away, and in that space, those discretionary powers have now been transformed into process mechanisms for the commission and make recommendations. As a matter of fact, you can liken it to having a Minister of Communications and having the NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission. You know how powerful the NCC has been, particularly those days we were doing the GSM and call when Ahmed Joda was chairman of NCC. People didn't even at that time remember who was the minister. The NCC was that powerful with his chairman and his executive Ndukwe then, and that's how they went all of the telecoms revolution. So the agency and the commission are going to become very, very powerful, very, very powerful institutions. And I hope that government, in populating the management of these institutions, will recognize their level of powers and how much what they bring to the industry, or how they can destroy an industry if you populate the place with it. I say this all the time. Once you hand over any aspect of the economy to the private sector, what becomes critical is regulation. So if the regulators are not strong, if the regulators are not enablers of business, then you destroy everything that is in that bill will be destroyed. If those two agencies, those two regulatory agencies, are not as effective as that anticipated to be. So you expect the right people to be in there, people with the right frame of mind that know that those agencies are enablers of business, that everything we have been discussing about transforming the oil and gas from being just a revenue contributor to being an enabler of business, all of that will happen or fail to happen depending on how those two agencies are run.
I'm still with you. I talked about the fact that the right people should be in the sector. From all indication, Professor Yinka and Professor Wumi have played their roles, midwifing the entire process, consultation, writing, dotting the I's, connecting, disconnecting. Now, this bill is on a journey to become an act. We have talked about the attitude of Nigerians at the moment. Now, you're a player in the industry. If the players in the industry, you have also talked about the fact that the private sector is very critical here. People like you who are players in the industry also have a role to play. What is your reaction to this?
I'm playing the role I should play. I'm a practitioner in the private sector. I've never pretended to be a government official. I've never pretended to be a regulator. I've never even pretended to be an advisor to government in any capacity. I have spent 41 years in the oil and gas industry, 12 years in NNPC as a staff, 10 years in the private company as a staff. And then the last 18 years, or 19, the last 18 years up to last year, I spent in founding and running two private sector companies, Platform Petroleum and Supply Petroleum. And they're there as examples of what I've been able to contribute to the industry. I do not aspire to do much more than that. I do not aspire to hold any government office. It don't have to be. It doesn't have to be the case that those who have done well in the private sector are those who should run the public sector. It doesn't have to be. There are experienced administrators. There are experienced people who might not even have been in the private sector, who can run those regulatory agencies. They are there. Give them the freedom to do what is right for this country. I'm not recommending that I should go and look for those who have made them in the private sector and that they alone can do the job. No, that's far from it.
Point Austin Avuru, former MD Saplat. It was nice having you on Tuesday Live tonight. Thank you so much for being on the program. Yinka, Professor Yinka, just your last word before we go.
I think that the bottom line is that we need to pass the bill and we need to ensure that it is implemented. We need the progress to be on our side very much. I mean, when I'm saying our side, I see this as the side of my that's implementation, there's nothing we can do. Nigerians will just never ever see the benefits of the petroleum industry. We have not had the benefits all this time. It is time for us to actually reap some benefits. So I'm concentrating on implementation. I'm saying that we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. So when we're talking about passing the bill, where there are provisions that we personally do not like, we need to find a way around them. There's still time for amendments. But where you don't get an amendment that gives you exactly what you want, realize that what we have is a workable version. It's an inelegant document in many ways, but if you are looking for pure elegance, where will you get it? The perfect bill doesn't exist. So that is my position, that we need to move forward and ensure that we break this jinx. 13 years is a long time to be treading water. We need to actually move forward and be able to use a lot of the laudable provisions. It's noteworthy that Mr. Avuru, as a practitioner, has come out and actually said some things that are really, really positive about what there is in the bill. So that is where I would end up. Thank you.
So Yinka Omorogbe, it was nice having you on Tuesday Live tonight. Thank you so much. Finally, let's go to Professor Wumi. Professor Wumi, just a sentence before we go.
Well, thank you very much. I think in the harmonization phase, let us look at how we can improve it and just expand some of those provisions that will not add value going forward. Overall, in my humble opinion, a political process cannot produce a perfect bill. This bill is good enough to be able to move on and take this monkey behind our back. But let us make sure that some provisions there that are not in sync with the House and the Senate are taken out. One is this petroleum product deregulation. We must do whatever we can to take subsidy out and not put anything that is going to lead to inefficiency in the market after deregulation, especially this idea of limiting petroleum import to only those with refinery. They do not make economic sense, and such should not be in a bill that has the future in view. Overall, I will not sacrifice a good bill on the altar of a perfect bill which does not exist. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Me, it was nice having you on the program. We enjoyed your thoughts. That's it on Tuesday Live tonight. We looked at Petroleum Industry Bill and matters arising. Thank you for your calls, and on behalf of all of us, don't forget to support the NTA in the onslaught against rape and rapists to be a star. Bye-bye.